It was a crisp, clear morning, one of those rare days where the sun shone brightly without a cloud in sight. The streets of Concord, New Hampshire hummed with the soft rhythm of daily life, birds chirping, cars passing, the occasional laughter of children playing. But for Karoline Leavitt, today was different. Today, the air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. It wasn't because of the usual bustle, but rather because of the day ahead, an event that, unbeknownst to most, would alter the course of her life. Karoline stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the clasp of her necklace. It was a simple thing, yet it had a deep meaning to her, one that she had kept to herself for years. The small, delicate silver pendant resting against her chest was a symbol of a secret, one she had long protected from the world. As her fingers brushed over it, memories surged, flickers of a time she'd tried to forget. She had always worn it, hidden beneath her clothes, a quiet companion to her daily life. But today, something felt different. Today, the necklace might be the key to something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Karoline wasn't expecting it. How could she? A simple, innocent question from a little girl, no older than 7, was all it took to open the floodgates. The girl had approached her with curious eyes, a questioning innocence that cut straight through Karoline's guarded exterior. With the unfiltered honesty only children possess, she asked, "What's that around your neck?" The question was harmless enough, yet it seemed to freeze the air around Karoline. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fall away, leaving only the soft thrum of her heartbeat in her ears. Karoline froze, her fingers tightening around the necklace as if it might slip away. What was it about this simple piece of jewelry that had such power over her? The girl's question echoed in her mind. And then, as if reading her thoughts, the child added, "It's shiny. Is it magic?" Magic. The word hung in the air, a tantalizing whisper of a past Karoline had long buried. Could the little girl know something? Or was it merely a child's innocent imagination at work? Karoline's pulse quickened as she took in the child's bright, trusting eyes. In that moment, everything shifted. This was no longer just a passing moment. Karoline felt a storm brewing, a tide of emotions rising to the surface, each one pulling her deeper into a mystery she was not ready to face. Karoline stood frozen, her heart pounding against her chest, her hand instinctively clutching, the necklace like a lifeline. The little girl's innocent question, was it magic, had struck a chord deeper than she could have anticipated. A flicker of something ancient, something buried, had sparked to life within her. It was a feeling she had long suppressed, locked, away behind years of calculated control. The little girl's mother, noticing the tension, stepped forward with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice light and breezy, as if the question had been no more than an innocent inquiry. She's got a habit of asking odd questions. But the words fell flat against Karoline's mind, which was spinning. Now, caught in the undertow of emotions she couldn't control. This wasn't just any question. This was the question, the one she'd hoped no one would ever ask again. With a forced smile, Karoline bent down to the little girl's eye level, trying to regain her composure. "It's just a necklace, sweetie. Nothing special," she said, her voice steady but hollow. The words felt like a lie, but it was the only answer she could offer without exposing the raw truth, the truth she wasn't ready to face. Not here. Not now. The little girl, however, was not to be dismissed so easily. She tilted her head, her big brown eyes narrowing in thought. "But it's shiny," she persisted. "Shiny things are usually special, right?" Karoline's smile faltered, and she stood up quickly, glancing away. Her breath hitched in her throat as memories began to surface. Memories she'd spent years burying. But before she could collect herself, another voice interrupted. "Karoline, everything okay?" Her older brother Jonathan had approached, sensing something was off. He stood tall, his broad shoulders framed by the soft morning sunlight, his expression laced with concern. Jonathan had always been her rock, the one person who knew her past, who had helped her move on after everything had happened. His presence was usually a comfort, but today it felt like a reminder of how much she had tried to leave behind. Karoline forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just a little girl's curiosity," she said, waving off the discomfort. But Jonathan's eyes weren't fooled. He studied her for a beat too long, and Karoline knew he could tell something was wrong. He had that way of seeing through her walls, especially when they were already shaky. Before he could say anything, she turned quickly, pushing past him. The necklace, her necklace, felt heavier now, as if it were pulling her into a past she wasn't ready to confront. And yet, despite the resistance in her chest, Karoline knew deep down that the question had already done its damage. The storm was coming. It was only a matter of time before it broke free. Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The little girl's innocent question had unseated her carefully built world, and as much as she tried to dismiss it, the nagging unease refused to let go. She tried to push it away, focusing on the tasks ahead, preparing for the upcoming event, staying distracted, maintaining control. But the more she tried to ignore it, the heavier the weight of her past became. By the time Karoline made her way to the venue, an old, restored church in downtown Concord, her mind was a whirlwind. The soft murmur of voices, the delicate clink of silverware setting the stage for the evening's gala, felt far removed from the storm brewing inside her. She walked through the grand wooden doors, greeted by familiar faces, colleagues, political, allies, friends, all smiles and pleasantries. The surface-level conversations were easy enough, but underneath, Karoline felt like a stranger in her own skin. Jonathan was already there, standing by the bar, talking to a group of their old friends. Karoline tried to push through the crowd to meet him, but as she neared, she caught sight of the necklace once again, its gleaming pendant now resting so temptingly under the thin fabric of her dress. It reminded her of something she couldn't forget, something too dangerous to let resurface. "Hey, Karoline, over here!" Jonathan's voice cut through the din of conversation, and she smiled weakly in response. She approached him, trying to muster her usual confidence, but the nagging feeling from earlier wouldn't leave. She kept her hand tucked firmly over the necklace, a protective gesture she hadn't consciously done since her teenage years. The subtle movement didn't go unnoticed by Jonathan. "You okay?" Jonathan asked, eyeing her closely. "You've been distant ever since we left the house." Karoline sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's nothing. Just some stuff from earlier, that's all. I'll be fine." But Jonathan wasn't convinced. "Is this about the girl? The one who asked about your necklace?" Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected Jonathan to bring it up. He'd been the one who helped her bury those memories in the first place. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, her voice suddenly sharper than she intended. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "I know you, Karoline. You've been running from things for a long time, and I can't help you if you won't talk about it." She flinched at the words, as if the accusation cut straight to the heart of the problem she hadn't been able to face. She had always prided herself on being in control, of not letting anything, especially her past, define her. But here it was, pulling her back in, forcing her to confront what she had tried to forget. "I can't go back there, John," she said quietly, lowering her gaze to the floor. "You don't understand." Before he could respond, a commotion at the front of the room broke their moment. The doors to the church were swung open, and a loud voice echoed through the space. "Karoline Leavitt, I need to speak with you." The voice was deep, unmistakable, and it sent a chill down her spine. She looked up, her heart racing. It was Evan, her old mentor, an influential figure who had once been more of a father to her than anyone else. But his sudden appearance wasn't a coincidence. He had never come for a social gathering, and the urgency in his tone made her stomach twist. "I'll be right back," Karoline muttered to Jonathan, already stepping away, her heart now pounding in her chest for entirely different reasons, as she moved toward Evan. Memories she'd tried so hard to bury began to creep back, days of mentorship, of trust, but also of secrets and choices she wished she hadn't made. She could feel the pull of something old, something dangerous. She couldn't run from it forever, no matter how much she tried. Evan's eyes locked with hers as she approached, and without preamble, he whispered, "It's time." Karoline's breath caught in her throat as Evan's words hit her like a physical blow. It's time. Those words, simple, yet laden with meaning, pulled her back into a world she had hoped to escape, a world she had carefully constructed walls around. The shift in her was immediate, like the ground beneath her feet suddenly crumbling away, revealing a dark abyss she had long since buried. She looked at Evan, her mind racing. He hadn't changed much. Still tall, imposing, with the same sharp gaze that had once commanded her loyalty. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something urgent that twisted her gut. "You need to come with me," Evan continued, his voice low but firm. "There's no more running, Karoline. It's happening, whether we're ready or not." Her pulse quickened as she took an instinctive step back, her hand once again moving toward the necklace hidden beneath her clothes, its weight grounding her to the present, reminding her of everything she had tried to bury. Evan's eyes flicked to her hand, his expression darkening. "You know it's not just the necklace, right? It's everything. She is awake." The mention of her sent a shiver down Karoline's spine. For years, Karoline had believed the woman she was a myth, a shadow from the past, an event she had successfully erased from her own memory. But the way Evan spoke of her made the blood in Karoline's veins run cold. I don't understand," Karoline stammered, struggling to form the words. How is this even possible? I thought you said it was over, that we were safe." Evan's jaw clenched, the lines on his face deepening with the weight of his next words. "It's never over, Karoline. Not with her. She's been gathering power in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to come back." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her. The name, the memory, the cold dread of it all flooded her mind in an instant. Karoline had tried to sever all ties to that life. The secretive meetings, the ancient rituals, the dark forces that had once threatened to consume everything she cared about. And yet, somehow, here they were again. She had hoped to leave it all behind. She had tried so hard to move forward, but the past never really lets go, does it? Her thoughts were interrupted as the weight of Evan's gaze intensified. He wasn't just worried. He was terrified, and that fear planted a seed of doubt deep in Karoline's heart. Maybe she wasn't ready for this. Maybe she wasn't ready to face the darkness again. "I can't go back to that," Karoline said, shaking her head, voice trembling. "I can't. After everything. After what happened, I can't do it." Evan stepped closer, his hand gently gripping her shoulder, the pressure oddly comforting. "You don't have a choice anymore. She'll find you, Karoline. She'll find all of us. The only way to stop her is to face what we tried to forget." Karoline closed her eyes, letting the weight of his words settle over her. Face what we tried to forget. She knew deep down that Evan was right. There was no escaping this. The moment the necklace had caught the little girl's attention, the past had reached out and grabbed hold of her, and now there was no turning back. Her heart ached as she looked at Evan, the man who had been like a father to her. She was no longer that naive girl who had followed him without question, but she also wasn't the woman she had become without him. The choices ahead of her were harder now, clearer but more painful. It was time, but what would it cost her? To face it? Karoline swallowed the knot in her throat, her voice steadying as she met Evan's eyes. Then let's do it. Let's end this. And as she spoke those words, a part of her understood that this decision, this moment, would change everything. There was no going back now. The storm was coming, and she was about to step straight into its eye. Karoline's heart pounded in, her chest as she followed Evan through the narrow alleyways, the night air growing colder with each step. The world seemed to close in around her, a suffocating weight pressing down as they approached the place where everything had begun. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place where she'd made the choices that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Every instinct in Karoline screamed for her to turn back, to run, to pretend none of this was happening. But deep inside, she knew there was no escaping it now. The past had caught up with her, and the darkness that had once threatened her was rising again. She could feel it in her bones, in the pulse of energy vibrating beneath the ground, a sinister presence reaching out to her from the depths of the past. Evan led her inside the warehouse, his face grim, his eyes scanning the shadows. The air was thick with the stench of old wood and dust, and Karoline felt the weight of years of secrets pressing against her. She barely registered the creak of the door behind them closing, locking them in. It was too late to back out now. "They're here," Evan whispered. "She's here." Karoline's stomach churned as the words sank in. She, the woman who had twisted Karoline's life into something unrecognizable. The woman whose name, whose power, had once threatened to destroy everything. And now, she was back. The room fell silent, save for the sound of their breathing. Then, like the flicker of an extinguished flame, a figure stepped out of the shadows, emerging like a ghost from the darkness. Karoline's breath caught in her throat. It was her. Isabel. Isabel was exactly how Karoline remembered her. Tall, with long dark hair, sharp features that could have belonged to an angel or a demon. Her eyes, once filled with a cold, calculating precision, now burned with a feverish intensity, an unholy fire that radiated from her like a storm. "Karoline," Isabel said, her voice a low, guttural purr. "It's been a long time." Karoline felt the floor beneath her tremble. The power emanating from Isabel was undeniable, a dark energy that made her knees feel weak. She wanted to run, to flee, but the words froze her in place. "You think you can escape this?" Isabel laughed, her smile twisted with something cruel and malicious. "You think you can run from what you are? From what we made you?" Evan stepped forward, placing himself between Karoline and Isabel, his jaw clenched. "You don't have to do this, Isabel. This isn't the way." Isabel's gaze shifted to Evan, and for a moment Karoline saw something flicker behind the mask of darkness. A betrayal, a rage, a long-forgotten connection. "Oh, Evan," Isabel murmured. "You still don't understand, do you? This is the only way. You've always been too soft, too weak. You let her go. Let her think she could leave this behind. But she's part of this. She always was." Karoline's breath came in short, jagged bursts. Her fingers tightened around the necklace, the cold metal seeping into her skin like a silent promise. The weight of it was heavier than ever, a symbol of everything she had tried to bury and everything she had left unfinished. "No," Karoline said, her voice trembling, but defiant. "You don't get to control me anymore, not this time." Isabel's eyes narrowed, the air thick with tension. "You think you can stop me? You think you've outgrown this?" Her voice was sharp now, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're nothing without me. You'll always be my creation." A flash of light erupted from Isabel's outstretched hand, a surge of raw, dark energy crackling toward Karoline like lightning. Without thinking, Karoline reacted, her fingers pulling the necklace free from her chest. In an instant, the pendant flared with a brilliant, blinding light, its power surging through her veins, igniting something deep inside her. Isabel's smug grin faltered as she realized what was happening. The necklace. Karoline had always known it held something more than just sentimental value. It was a link, a key, a force that tied her to the very essence of what she had once been. The power exploded between them, a violent clash of light and dark, of past and present, as Karoline took a step forward, her eyes burning with newfound resolve. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I'm not your creation. I'm mine." The explosion of energy surged outward, the very foundation of the warehouse shaking as the forces collided. Karoline stood tall, the necklace now glowing with an intensity that seemed to pierce the darkness around them. This was the moment, the one she had been preparing for her entire life. No more running, no more hiding. As the light consumed them, both Karoline knew this battle was far from over. But for the first time, she understood that the power had always been hers, and it was time to claim it. The light from the necklace was blinding, overwhelming, and yet Karoline felt a calmness within it, a power she had never fully embraced, now flooding her with purpose. The shockwave of energy blasted outward, sending Isabel stumbling back, her expression shifting from smug confidence to sheer panic. Karoline's fingers clenched around the pendant, now fully alight, its brilliance filling the space like the dawn of a new day. And in that light, Karoline saw it clearly, her past, her choices, the weight of her guilt, and the strength she had buried beneath years of fear and shame. The power had always been hers to wield, but she had been too afraid of what it meant. She had feared what she might become if she embraced it fully, but no more. This was her story. As Isabel faltered, Karoline took a step forward, her voice steady, unwavering. "You may have created me, but you don't control me anymore." The energy pulsated one last time before Isabel, her face twisted with rage, was consumed by the light. Her body disintegrated into the very air around them, her presence, her power, gone in an instant. The silence that followed was deafening. Karoline stood there, breathless, the necklace dimming in her hand as the final remnants of Isabel's dark influence evaporated. Slowly, she looked up at Evan, who had been watching the entire exchange, with a mixture of awe and relief. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly ajar, as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. "You did it," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "You really did it." Karoline nodded, her heart still racing, but a sense of peace settling in. She hadn't done it alone. Evan had been right by her side, guiding her, supporting her, but ultimately, it had been her choice, her strength, and her refusal to let the past define her that had made the difference. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "But this was mine." As the light from the necklace finally faded, the room returned to its eerie quiet. The storm had passed. The darkness that had loomed over her for so long had been vanquished. Karoline turned away from the wreckage and walked toward the door, her steps sure and steady. She could feel the weight of the future ahead of her, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a beginning. The past was behind her, but the journey was far from over, and for the first time in years, Karoline Leavitt felt like she was truly free.